1907. A boat chugs into New York Harbor. One passenger, 17-year-old Ida Moss, clambers to the front of the ship and peers over the shoulders of the crowds that have gathered, trying to catch a glimpse of land. Ida had fled home in the middle of the night weeks before, as violence had spread across the Lithuanian countryside. She traveled alone. She didn't speak a word of English, and all of her belongings fit in one ragged suitcase. As she tried to peer out, all of a sudden, the clouds parted, and the ultimate beacon of hope, Lady Liberty's torch, gleamed in the sunshine. I love imagining Ida's journey to New York this way, because I don't actually know a lot about her life. But if not for this journey, I wouldn't be here today, because Ida was my great-grandmother. Ida's journey represents an important part of my personal historical timeline. I've thought a lot about my personal history because some years ago I was a history teacher, and I had to justify to my students why they should learn history to make a better future. Trust me, this was not always easy. But one of the things I've learned is that there are some people who are especially good at this. And these people I call historian leaders. What is the historian leader? The historian leader learns lessons from the past to build a better future. They live their lives in historical context. One of the things that the historian leader can do to do this easily is think about timelines. So I'll share for a moment my personal timeline. Remember Ida. 110 years ago, she traveled to the United States from Lithuania. For 3 generations, this story has inspired my family, has taught us to live our lives with courage, and to work hard to pass on a better life to our descendants. Her story also embodies an important belief of mine that the violence that caused her to flee her home was something that should never be repeated, and that we would only be able to do that if we learn the lessons from history. So that's my timeline, an important lesson from the past, pointing to the future. Now, a timeline is helpful to know where we are today and where we're going tomorrow, but there's a risk that we take too short of a view. Maybe you've had an experience like this at the GSB. I've been tempted to dismiss a case because it's 20 years old. But the reality is, it's the long view of history that helps us learn those enduring lessons that stand the test of time, because it's not necessarily the specific technology or leader that's most important. Or looking forward. I spend a lot of my time these days seeking career advice or trying to predict the next disruptive technology. I'm really curious about what's going to happen tomorrow, or next quarter, or the next 4 years. But I worry that if I don't think longer out, I may miss the important lessons that show me what I was meant to do here on this planet with my one life. This is what the historian leader does all the time. They are concerned with the change. They are concerned with change over time, but their view is over generations. The historian leader is not so concerned necessarily with the fate of an individual product or company, but with the fate of civilizations. What would the world look like if we had more historian leaders? I think it might be helpful if I would share with you the story of the first historian leader who got me excited about history. When I was 16, I was like most middle-class American kids. I was pretty self-absorbed. I liked TV and sports, and I had a vision of my future mansion that I would hopefully one day buy. But when I read Howard Zinn in my US history class, it completely changed my perspective. Howard Zinn was a World War II vet, turned history professor, turned influential activist, who was involved in the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and the labor movements. It was when he was doing his master's research that he discovered an historical event that was a major inspiration for him. In 1914, there had been a coal mine strike in Colorado. The US National Guard was called in and ended up being responsible for the deaths of a number of strikers, their wives, and their children. For Zinn, this was a moment of injustice in American history that continued to repeat itself. And he continually came back to this when he chose to involve himself in labor strikes, to step out and speak up in the anti-Vietnam War movement and in the civil rights movement. Now, Howard Zinn, as a historian leader, didn't just learn from the past to try to build a better future, but he also was exemplary in thinking about scope. So in his book, he traces American history from the arrival of Columbus through to today. And his vision of the future was of a world without violence. Imagine that. Now, Zinn didn't think this would happen tomorrow. He knew it would take generations, and he didn't expect it would happen in his lifetime. But it was the boldness of this vision that inspired millions of his readers and followers to work towards that audacious goal. The historian leader isn't just a historian leader. It can come in many forms. Another favorite of mine is Elon Musk, whose transportation company is named after a 19th century inventor. Elon Musk's vision of the future is radically different from today. When he talks about missions to Mars, if it is achieved, it may not be him driving it, but somebody in the next generation who is inspired by him. Imagine the world with more historian leaders. What if we all were historian leaders? I'd like to give you guys one idea that you can take away from today if you choose to walk the path of the historian leaders. Take out your hands and hold them like this. In this hand, I'd like you to imagine the important historical influences in your life. It could be your parents, your grandparents. Maybe it includes some key historical figures that inspire you. Imagine that. Maybe introduce them to each other. In your other hand, I want you to imagine the future. These could be your children or grandchildren. It could be people that you have mentored or will mentor. It could be the people that you hope will lead our country and institutions in the future. In your two hands, in you always have both the past and the future. This is your timeline. You can put your hands down. The historian leader learns from the past to make a better future. To be a historian leader, use the timeline as a tool to remember where you came from, to remember where you're going, and to go there boldly. And I will see you in the history books. Thank you.